Hello, Mordrim here. Today I want to share with you my data Excel sheet for the Druid. Specifically, I looked at the Paragon board and compiled every information I could find. This includes the points required for the glyph slots, what's the point effectiveness of those, how many stats can you get for the specific board, and I also looked at the magic and rare nodes in the top right corner right here, and you also have the points required, the difference you get from the 340% increase for the glyph, and as you can see, the magic glyphs are pretty much garbage. They have very low point value. 2.4% is nothing. So you usually want to avoid the 240% magic nodes, even with a very good threshold bonus. What we really want to do is look for the rare increases. So those have very nice boni. Some of them have very unique boni, like for example, life percentage. 19.2% is the difference for this one. If you pick this one up, you get this for just 6 points. So the value per point is very high. You can also get crit damage for earth skills, 12 per point for 6. That's very nice. You can also get some very nice defenses like armor percentage while in wearable form or reduce taken from vulnerable targets. So those are very strong glyph candidates for the rare 240% ones. So when do you want to actually use your per stat glyphs? For this one I compiled a very nifty table right here. So we have one for the int in 4 radius, dex for 4 radius, and will for 4 radius. And as you can see here, you have a point effectiveness sorted by the value. What we see here is there is an anomaly for the dexterity boards. The dexterity boards have very bad point effectiveness, except for the starter board. This one only requires 9 points to get 39 stats. When we compare this one for 49 stats, 17 points, that's an 8-point difference. So that's not very great. We are spending a lot of points for the stats we are gaining here. So usually a build that wants to have multiple glyphs, 6 or 7, or multiple boards they really want to have, you don't want to use the stat glyphs. We also have another table right here. This table shows you the maximum obtainable value of a glyph increase. So for example, in a beast board gets a multiplier of 10. We multiply the 28.8 glyph with this one and get 288% increased overpower damage. This is the overpower glyph. So this one is extremely effective for the points you're spending. But the 8.8% glyph doesn't really get that much stats. So this one has a very low effectiveness per point. This is lower than any rare node. And a rare node gets 8%. This one only gets 5%. So you usually don't want to use this glyph. So that's the information on this board. I also compiled legendary node and a glyph node datasheet right here. So you can look at the specific legendary node, think about your build. Is this one really necessary for your build? Is it not necessary? You can rate this one. Usually S tier is something that's really important for the build or very strong. This one, for example, in the Thunderstruck tree, the legendary node has a 30% increased critical strike damage versus vulnerable targets or immobilized targets. We can look at this one right here and you can see an X. An X means a multiplier, so this one should multiply all your critical damage all the time. That's very strong. So we want to pick this one and path to this one. Ancestral Guidance, for example, here is very good in the early game since we are spending a lot of spirit, but when we get reductions to spirit consumption and increases to spirit generation, we don't really need to pick this one. It's a 30% increased multiplier for 5 seconds, but if you're only spending 10 spirit per cast, you're usually not going to proc this one, and this one decreases in value. So let's have a look at the glyphs. So what I usually do for the glyphs is look at the values you can obtain at level 20 and the additional bonus you get after you clear the threshold. For this one, we have a very low value. We calculated this one in this datasheet for the per point. So this one is a really bad glyph. The bonus is very bad. The increase is very bad. It also requires you to be healthy, so that's not something you want to pick. Now the community has theorized that there are damage buckets for specific damage increases, like while healthy, but that's not true. Wuji has confirmed that all of those increases are in just one bucket. So this makes this glyph very bad. But we can still benefit from it, so it's in B tier. When we look at the rare node after this one, we have an intelligence threshold for the protector, while you have a barrier. I would rather have this one unconditionally, and we can get this one unconditionally from another glyph. So this one is only B tier. And we go through every single one of those. And when we look at something like an S tier node, we see vulnerable target damage. We apply vulnerable for 3 seconds. This can only happen every 20 seconds per enemy. So this one is a very strong glyph for basically every single build. You want to include this one because vulnerable is a specific damage modifier that's multiplying all your damage. So this is very, very strong. So this is S tier. You want to include this one. So we want to have a dexterity board for this one. Now an A tier glyph is usually something you want to slot in a glyph slot that has the required intelligence. It's not needed for the build. It's not extremely good, but it's something you want to keep in mind if you have the specific glyph slot and don't want to put anything else in this one. So that's the A tier. Now the next type of glyph I want to mention are the ones that have a multiplier attached to them with the bonus. This one requires willpower to unlock. This is very easy to get, but this one also only increases on magic nodes in range. So when do you want to use this node? This node you want to pick when you have a board that's very far away. You cannot get the bonus of the rare nodes in the board. So for example, when we look at one here and you have something like this, and this is your 10th board, or 6th board or something, you're going to need 800 or 900 dexterity to unlock the boni for the rare nodes. And this is very hard to acquire, so not something you want to pick. But the magic nodes do not have a threshold, so you want to pick the magic nodes all around this and the rare node. You won't unlock this one, but you can buff the value you get from the storm skill damage right here. Something you want to pick at the end, like additional life, you can combo with this one. And there's also glyphs that have a very strong bonus, like for example 10% damage reduction. They have a threshold for willpower, they scale with willpower. Druids have a lot of willpower on their board, so it's very easy to get this increase to a very high value. When we look at this one on the first page, and we have the willpower board here, we have values of up to 140 compared to 64 or 88. So it's strictly better to get the damage increases on the primary damage increasing stat of the specific class, for example, Druid willpower. Everything else is basically self-explanatory. Well, there's one more glyph I want to mention. This one has critical strike damage per 5 dexterity in radius. This is very, very strong, but it is very hard to gain access to 100% crit. 30% is really hard already, but 100 or even 50 or 70, nearly impossible for some classes, except when you are using specific conditional effects that proc and guarantee 100% crit. The value here you're gaining is extremely good, because the threshold bonus is also increasing the critical strike damage enemies take from you by a specific value. This is a multiplier to the critical strike damage we are dealing, so it's multiplying our crit, so we are critting even harder. A very, very strong node, and I think one of the best in the game. So I mentioned stats just now. You can get a lot of offensive, utility stats and defensive stats on the Druid, and all of those have something in common. They occupy the same gear pieces, the same slots. You can only roll 4 stats on a gear piece. You also have your gem slots, but those don't count for this one. So when you're thinking about the glove slot and you want lucky hit chance, you want crit damage, you want to increase to your skill, but you're still missing defenses or utility like cooldown reduction on your amulet or your helmet, and you're occupying this one with spirit cost reduction, you're probably not going to get a lot of damage in, because you still need your defenses. You still need increased percentage to armor, reduced damage taken from enemies that are vulnerable, reduced damage taken from close enemies, distant enemies. There is a lot of stuff you want to get, but I want to focus on the offensive ones. So the offensive stats have buckets. You're going to look at this one and be a bit confused because you're seeing different colors, but this is very, very easy to explain. The green color signifies this stat is coming from your skill tree and your legendary powers. So that's the big damage multiplier you will get. Then you have willpower. Willpower increases the damage you deal by 0.1%. Each stat has a class attached to it. So for example, the barbarian is going to stack strength. The necromancer is going to stack intelligence. The sorceress, intelligence, dexterity for the rogue. This will be in its own bucket and multiply the damage you deal. Meaning 10 willpower will increase the damage you deal by 1% multiplicatively. 100 willpower will increase the damage you deal by 10% multiplicatively. So it will increase all the damage you deal by 10%. Attack speed is also something you want to consider on some skills. For example, Lightning Storm doesn't really need this because it has a fixed attack speed, a very fast attack speed. And you're going to drop your basic ability sometime in the end game for another debilitating roar or another utility spell because we're generating our spirit through other means. So attack speed falls flat and we don't want to pick it on gear. So that frees up an offensive stat. So when we look at critical strike chance, we are going to see something that's not very pleasant to us. We cannot gain 100% through gear. The most we can get is around 25-30%. So you're not going to crit all the time if you do not have a specific proc. For example, Urban Might. So on my Lightning Storm Druid, I have Urban Might. I converted this one through a legendary power, so it applies the storm skills. And this one increases the lucky hit chance for critical strikes by 10%, but it guarantees after proccing that all my strikes and all my attacks are going to be critical strikes. It also restores all my spirit. So that's something you want to consider when you're in the end game. It lets you drop your basic ability basically. Back to the stats. This makes critical strike chance not as valuable as you would otherwise consider it to be. So you need to think about the value of this specific stat. For the Storm Druid, I picked this one because it increases the lucky hit chance. So critical strike chance is very good for the Storm Druid. And now you want to look at conditioners. For example, injured, earth, immobilized, human, and so on and so forth. Some of them are very easy to sustain on your build. For example, damage while human, when you're casting Lightning Storm, you're always going to be human, so you're always going to get the increase. Damage while healthy is the next one, or fortified. You usually will be healthy, so in the 80% health range, or fortified because of the skills we have chosen. So those are guaranteed to be increases to your damage. Same with core critical strike damage, or lightning critical strike damage, or vulnerable critical strike damage. Those will be very, very strong and you want to pick this one up on your gear for damage increases, but you want to balance this one with your defenses. And most of those increases you will get through the Paragon board. And the last one, the last bucket is vulnerable damage. Basically every instance of vulnerable damage will be additive to the 20% base increase you're going to apply to enemies. So if you have plus 50% vulnerable damage, you're going to deal 70% more damage. That's very, very strong, and basically every build that's not going to include vulnerable damage is going to suck. Now I also included this one for all other classes. As you can see here, this one is by SnowRaven6969 on Discord. He made this one, I just copy and pasted this one and formatted it in a different font. Now this basically sums up all I wanted to tell you about build making in Diablo IV. You need to look at the stat requirements, you need to look at the glyphs, you need to look at the gear you want to use, you want to look at the gear bases. There is a lot to think about, and the Paragon board system is very complicated and requires a little bit of knowledge and insight. So if you want to build something for the Druid, use this, read through this one. I hope I explained it in a good way, something you can understand and use for your own builds. But if not, I will be providing you with endgame build guides based on this one for the Druid, and I hopefully will also be able to do something for the Sorceress. Anyway, make sure to join my Discord. You can find a lot of already finished builds right here in the tab. That's the Diablo IV builds. I have a lot of different legendary powers included. Some of them are not found in dungeons but dropped, but that's okay. That's something I mentioned. You can find those and use those, but they are not mandatory for the build to function. You have the skill tree finished right here, and there is no Paragon board attached because those are leveling guides. There is one already finished for the end game that has a Paragon board and all legendary powers. You can just use this one, but I was starting to ramble, so I'm going to finish this one now. You can find this Excel sheet on the Discord. I will upload this in the cheat sheet tab right here and pin it. You can also find leveling cheat sheets here. I'm not finished with everything, but I will hopefully get to it in the next few hours. Anyway, make sure to leave a like, sub and comment, and bye.